Welcome to Work Fluent.
Come on in, get comfortable. This one's for you. I still have the sticky note. Real one. Still on my monitor from a job I left 2 years ago. It just says 3 words. Greg equals finance.
You needed a note to remember that Greg was in finance?
I needed a note because there were 5 different Gregs in 5 different departments, and my brain simply refused to keep them straight.
5 Gregs.
5 Gregs. And I met all of them, along with about 30 other people, on the same Monday morning.
Hi, I'm Ryan, and I have never met 5 Gregs, but I have absolutely forgotten someone's name 4 separate times in one conversation.
I'm Sarah, and today is entirely about the first week at a new job. Specifically the version of it where English isn't the language you grew up thinking in.
Everyone's worried AI is coming for their job in 5 years,
Nobody's worried about you surviving your first Tuesday.
which is honestly a little wild, because the 5-year thing is theoretical. Tuesday is happening to you right now, live, with 30 new names and 0 context.
And it's not about your English being wrong. It's that a first week is basically a fire hose of names, acronyms, and unwritten rules, and you're supposed to absorb all of it while also sounding calm and competent.
So today, we're doing the whole week start to finish. The name overload on day 1. The jargon nobody explains. The unwritten rules nobody hands you. Asking the question that feels too basic. Being the only person who doesn't already know everyone. And the first real mistake you make. And how you actually recover from it.
One first week, every small moment that makes you feel like the outsider in the room.
And I want to say directly, this is exactly the kind of workplace English moment nobody actually teaches you anywhere. Not in a class, not in a textbook, not even in most onboarding programs.
Right? Companies will train you on the software and the org chart. Nobody trains you on what to actually say when you've forgotten someone's name for the 3rd time.
Which is exactly the gap we're filling today. Let's start exactly where your story started. Day 1, 30 names, 0 chance of remembering them.
This is such a real physical kind of overwhelmed. It's not that you're bad with names, it's that your brain simply wasn't built to file 30 new names and faces in one morning while also trying to look like you're following the building tour.
So what do you actually do besides writing Greg equals finance on a sticky note?
Here's the reframe I want you to hold on to. Think of it as a book everyone else already read. They've had months or years with these names, you're just opening to page 1. You're not behind. You just haven't had the same amount of time with the material yet.
A book everyone else already read. I like that because it takes away the idea that you should already know this stuff.
Exactly, and practically, here's the actual phrase that saved me more than anything else. Remind me, which team are you on again? You're not admitting total failure, you're just doing a normal, expected recheck that everyone in a new job needs constantly.
So asking twice isn't a confession, it's just standard onboarding behavior.
Completely standard. Nobody's keeping score of how many times you ask someone their name in week 1. They've all been the new person at some point too.
Okay. Second thing, and I think this one is genuinely underrated as a source of first week stress. The jargon. Every workplace has its own private vocabulary, acronyms, tool names, shorthand for projects.
Oh, this is where I felt the most lost, actually, more than the names. Someone would say something like, "Can you check the QBR deck before the stand-up?" And I'd just nod, having understood maybe half of that sentence.
It's like being handed a map with no legend. The map itself might even be simple, but none of the symbols mean anything to you yet.
A map with no legend. That's exactly it. And the instinct is to just nod along and hope context eventually explains it, which sometimes it does, but usually way too slowly.
So what's the actual move instead of nodding?
A simple direct phrase, "Can you spell that out for me?" Not spell it letter by letter necessarily, just meaning walk me through what that actually stands for. People are almost always happy to explain jargon because they usually forget it isn't obvious to someone new.
I used this constantly in my first few weeks somewhere, actually, and I never once got a weird reaction. If anything, people seemed a little relieved to explain it, like they'd been waiting for someone to ask.
Which makes sense. Jargon becomes invisible to the people using it every day. They're not hiding it from you on purpose, it's just become background noise to them.
There's actually a specific version of this I want to name too. Acronyms that get used out loud constantly, but nobody ever actually writes out in full anywhere. You can't even look them up because you don't know what letters to search.
Oh, that's such a specific kind of stuck.
It happened to me with something as simple as a meeting called the EOD Sync. I sat through two of them assuming EOD meant something about a specific department before I finally just asked.
What did it turn out to mean?
End of day. That's it. I'd built up this whole theory about a department acronym for 2 entire meetings, when it just meant the daily wrap-up call.
That's such a perfect example of exactly why asking early saves you so much unnecessary confusion later.
Genuinely, I could have asked in the first 10 seconds of meeting one and saved myself an entire week of quiet, private confusion. Okay, next stop, and this one's less about vocabulary and more about the invisible stuff, the unwritten rules. Every workplace has them. Do people actually take their full lunch break? Is it fine to leave 5 minutes early on a Friday? Does anyone actually read the urgent emails immediately?
Nobody hands you a manual for this. You're just supposed to absorb it by watching, which takes time you don't really have in week 1.
So, how do you actually shortcut that?
You ask directly, and there's a specific phrase that works well here. Is there a norm here for this? It's a safe, neutral way to ask about culture without it sounding like you're questioning whether the rule is a good one.
Give me an actual example.
Is there a norm here for how quickly people usually reply to Slack messages after hours? That's a completely reasonable, normal question, and it saves you weeks of anxious guessing.
I actually wish I'd asked that exact question at one job. I spent almost a month replying to every message within minutes, assuming that was expected, and it turned out literally nobody else did that. A whole month of quietly stressing over something nobody else was even thinking about.
How'd you find out?
My manager gently mentioned it almost as a joke, like, you know you don't have to answer at midnight, right? I'd just been guessing the whole time, and guessed wrong.
That's such a good example of exactly the kind of thing one direct question would have solved in the first week instead of a month of unnecessary stress.
Is there a version of this question that works even when you're not sure who to actually ask? Because sometimes it's not obvious whether it's a manager question or a peer question.
Honestly, a peer is usually the safer first ask for anything culture-related. Managers set the official policy, but peers usually know the actual lived version of it, which is what you really want to know anyway.
So ask the person doing the job day to day, not necessarily the person who wrote the handbook.
Exactly, because the handbook and the actual lived norm don't always match, and the peer is the one who can tell you the honest gap between the two.
Okay, this next one I think might be the hardest, honestly. Asking a question that feels too basic, the kind where you're scared people will think, how do you not know this already?
This is where a lot of people just go silent instead of asking, and then spend way more time confused than they would have spent just asking the question.
What's the actual framing that works?
Think of it as training wheels you're allowed to use out loud. Nobody looks at someone learning to ride a bike and thinks less of them for having training wheels on. It's expected, it's temporary, and it's there for exactly this stage.
A temporary badge, not a permanent label. New hire status has an expiration date, whether or not it feels like it in the moment.
Exactly, and the actual phrase that works here is simple. This might be a basic question, but It's not an apology, it's just labeling the question honestly, which almost always gets you a patient, complete answer instead of a confused one.
I think people worry the label itself makes them look weaker, but it's actually the opposite.
It really is. Naming it up front tells the other person exactly how to answer, clearly, simply, without assuming background you don't have yet. It actually gets you a better answer, not a worse impression.
Let's talk about something that isn't really about information at all. The specific loneliness of everyone else already knowing each other. Inside jokes, shared history, a whole social world that started before you arrived.
Oh, this one's less about vocabulary and entirely about feeling. You're not missing facts, you're missing years of shared context you can't actually catch up on quickly.
It's like walking into a party that started without you. The music's already going, everyone already has a drink, and you're just standing in the doorway.
A party that started without you. That's such a real feeling, and I think people try to fix it by forcing themselves into the existing jokes, which usually falls a little flat.
So what actually works instead?
You don't need to fake history you don't have. Instead, get genuinely curious about the history that's already there. I'd love to hear the story behind that. Is a phrase that turns you from an outsider trying to fake belonging into someone genuinely interested in the group's actual history.
So instead of pretending you already know the joke, you just ask about its origin.
Exactly, and people love telling those stories honestly. It becomes a genuine connection instead of an awkward performance of already belonging.
I actually think there's a version of this that's even more useful for genuine group inside jokes specifically. The ones that don't have a real explainable origin story. They've just existed forever.
What do you do with those?
Honestly, sometimes the most disarming thing is just naming it lightly. Okay, I clearly missed the origin story on that one, but I'm enjoying the chaos of not knowing. It turns the confusion itself into something a little funny, instead of something you're quietly embarrassed about.
That's such a good reframe, actually, because it takes the exact thing that feels isolating and makes it a shared, lighthearted moment instead of a private, quiet one you carry around all day.
Right? You're not pretending to be in on it. You're openly, cheerfully not in on it yet, which people find genuinely charming more often than not. Let's get to the end of the week now, because I think this last stop is the one people dread the most. Your first real mistake as the new person.
Oh, this is inevitable, by the way, not a possibility. An inevitability, everyone makes a real mistake in their first couple of weeks somewhere.
What actually happens in your head when it happens, though?
This spiral of, they're going to regret hiring me, which is almost always wildly disproportionate to whatever the actual mistake was.
So what's the actual move once it's happened?
Own it directly, briefly, without over-explaining, and mention what you'll do differently. Something like, I sent that to the wrong list. That's on me. I'll double-check distribution lists going forward. Short, honest, forward-looking?
Not a 5-minute apology tour.
Definitely not. The short version reads as competent and self-aware. The long, over-apologetic version actually draws more attention to the mistake, not less.
I made a genuinely embarrassing mistake in my second week somewhere, actually. Sent an internal draft to an external client by accident.
What happened?
I caught it about 10 minutes later. Emailed the client immediately, said something like, apologies, that was sent in error, please disregard, here's the correct version, and moved on. Nobody ever brought it up again.
Because you treated it like the small, fixable thing it actually was, instead of a catastrophe.
Exactly, and honestly, the whole first week, start to finish, is really just one skill practiced 6 different times. Treating your own newness as temporary and normal instead of as a permanent flaw you need to hide.
Fresh eyes, not a blank slate. You're not empty of value just because you're new. You're just seeing things nobody who's been there for years can see anymore.
Fresh eyes, not a blank slate. I really like ending on that one.
Okay, before the word tour, let's hand you real practical tools for your own first week.
Conversation starters. First one. Practice the name recheck phrase out loud. Remind me, which team are you on again? Say it 5 times until it stops feeling like an admission and starts feeling like a normal sentence.
Second, practice decoding jargon. Next time someone uses a term you don't know in real life or in a role play, say, "Can you spell that out for me?" and actually wait for the full answer instead of nodding along.
Third, write down one unwritten workplace norm you've been guessing about instead of asking. Practice the actual question. Is there a norm here for this?
Fourth, practice labeling a basic question honestly. Pick something you've been embarrassed to ask and say out loud, "This might be a basic question, but," followed by the actual question.
Fifth, the next time someone references something you don't have context for, practice asking, "I'd love to hear the story behind that," instead of faking familiarity.
And sixth, if you've made a first week mistake recently, practice the short, forward looking version out loud. Name it, own it, say what changes, and stop there.
And seventh, one more. If you're currently early somewhere, actually write down 3 things you still don't fully understand, whether that's an acronym, a norm, or someone's actual job title. Pick one and ask about it today, not this week, today.
The list itself is useful too. Honestly, just seeing it written down usually makes it feel smaller and much less permanent than it did floating around in your head.
7 real tools, 1 very real week.
Let's do our word tour. Today's phrases, all in one place.
First, a book everyone else already read. You're not behind on knowing people's names and history, you've just had less time with the material so far. In daily life, I just moved to this neighborhood, so everyone else is a book I haven't read yet.
Second, a map with no legend. Jargon and acronyms are symbols nobody's explained to you yet, not proof you don't understand the actual work. In daily life, this new app is a map with no legend until someone shows me what the icons mean.
Third, a temporary badge, not a permanent label. New hire status has an expiration date, even when it doesn't feel that way in the moment. In daily life, being the new person at the gym is just a temporary badge, not a permanent label.
Fourth, training wheels you're allowed to use out loud. Asking basic questions in your first weeks is expected and completely normal, not a weakness to hide. In daily life, I asked the obvious question at the meetup and figured training wheels out loud, no shame.
Fifth, a party that started without you. The existing history and inside jokes aren't a wall. They're just something you can get curious about instead of trying to fake. In daily life, joining my partner's old friend group felt like a party that started without me, until I just started asking questions.
And sixth, fresh eyes, not a blank slate. Being new means you can see things clearly that people who've been there for years have stopped noticing. In daily life, the new intern noticed the process was broken immediately, pure fresh eyes, not a blank slate.
6 phrases, 1 first week, a lot less dread going in.
All right, your homework this week. If you're starting somewhere new soon or you're still early somewhere now, pick just one phrase from today and use it deliberately, once.
Not all 6. 1. Maybe it's just, "Can you spell that out for me?" The next time someone drops an acronym you don't recognize.
And if none of today's specific scenarios matches what you're actually facing this week, the underlying move is still the same one. Name the gap honestly, out loud, instead of quietly guessing and hoping it resolves itself.
That's really the pattern underneath all 6 of these, isn't it? Every single one is just some version of saying the true thing plainly, instead of pretending you already have information you don't.
Exactly. And that pattern works whether you're 3 days in or 3 years in, honestly. And if it still feels a little uncomfortable to ask, that discomfort is just the temporary badge talking, not proof you're doing something wrong.
I want to circle back to something from the very top, actually. We said everyone's worried about the 5-year AI question, and nobody's worried about your first Tuesday. But by the end of week 1, Tuesday's already history.
Right. And that's honestly the most reassuring part of this whole topic. None of this lasts. The name confusion, the jargon, the unwritten rules. Every single one of them has a natural expiration date, usually much sooner than it feels like in the moment, even though in the moment it can feel like it's going to last forever.
I still think about my own first week sometimes, actually, and how permanent the confusion felt on day 1 versus how completely normal everything felt by the following Monday.
That gap between how permanent it feels and how temporary it actually is might be the single most useful thing to hold on to through the whole week.
One more thing I want to say directly. The version of you that seems calm and fluent by month 3 isn't a different person than the one drowning in names on day 1. It's just the same person, a little further down the same book.
A little further down the same book. And if you're listening to this before your first day somewhere, genuinely good luck. You'll be fine, even on the parts that don't feel fine yet, and even on the day it feels the least fine of all.
You really will.
This is Sarah,
And this is Ryan.
and you've been listening to Work Fluent.
We'll see you in the next one.